The sun blazed over the military town, its dusty streets humming with the rhythm of daily life. Soldiers marched in neat rows, vendors hawked steaming buns, and children darted through alleys, their laughter echoing off cracked walls. Susan Taylor, a schoolteacher with dark hair tied back in a loose bun, stepped out of the local market, her arms laden with groceries. Her worn cotton dress clung to her skin in the midday heat, but her mind was elsewhere, on lesson plans, her students, and the strained silences that filled her home with Ryan, her husband. A piercing scream shattered the air as she turned onto the main road. Susan froze, her grocery bag slipping slightly in her grip. Across the street, a black van screeched to a halt, its tires kicking up dust clouds. Two men, their faces obscured by caps, leapt out and seized a small boy no older than 7. The child's school bag fell to the ground, spilling pencils and a tattered notebook. His cries, sharp, desperate, cut through the chaos. "Help! Miss Taylor!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with terror. Susan's heart lurched. She recognized the boy instantly, Ethan Carter, one of her students, the grandson of General Carter, the town's revered old commander. Her eyes darted around, searching for help, but the street had fallen eerily quiet. Bystanders backed away, their faces pale, unwilling to intervene. The men shoved Ethan toward the van, one gripping his arm so tightly the boy winced. Susan's pulse thundered in her ears. She should run, call for Ryan, alert the authorities, but something deeper, something instinctive, propelled her forward. "Stop!" Susan shouted, dropping her groceries. Apples rolled across the pavement as she sprinted toward the van, her sandals slapping against the ground. The men turned, startled, their eyes narrowing at her approach. One, a wiry figure with a scar across his cheek, sneered. He growled, "Mind your business, lady," but Susan didn't falter. She threw herself at him, grabbing his arm with every ounce of strength, her nails digging into his sleeve. "Let him go!" she demanded, her voice fierce despite the tremor in her hands. The second man, broader and more menacing, lunged at her. Susan ducked, but his fist grazed her shoulder, sending a jolt of pain through her. She stumbled but clung to the wiry man's arm, pulling him back from Ethan. The boy's wide eyes met hers, brimming with fear and hope. "Miss Taylor," he whimpered, struggling against his captor. Susan's chest tightened. She couldn't let them take him. Not Ethan, her student, or the child she'd promised to protect. The broad man grabbed Susan's hair, yanking her head back. Her scalp burned, but she twisted, elbowing him in the ribs. He grunted, loosening his grip just enough for her to wrench free. Her dress tore at the sleeve, the fabric ripping under the strain, but she barely noticed. She lunged again, this time for Ethan, her fingers brushing his wrist before the wiry man shoved her to the ground. Gravel bit into her palms as she hit the pavement, her breath ragged. "You're gonna regret this," he spat, drawing a knife from his belt. The blade glinted in the sunlight, sharp and unforgiving. Susan's stomach churned, but she scrambled to her feet, placing herself between Ethan and the men. "Take me instead," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "Just let the boy go." The words tumbled out, reckless but resolute. The men exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. Then the broad one laughed, a cold, guttural sound. "Fine," he said, seizing her arm. "You're coming with us." Before she could react, they dragged her toward the van, their grip bruising. Ethan screamed, kicking wildly as the wiry man hauled him inside. Susan fought, her heels scraping the ground, but the broad man's strength overwhelmed her. He shoved her into the van's dark interior, slamming the door shut. The engine roared to life, and the vehicle lurched forward, throwing Susan against the metal wall. Her shoulder throbbed, and her torn dress clung to her sweat-soaked skin, but her eyes locked onto Ethan, huddled in the corner, his small frame trembling. As the van sped through the town, Susan's mind raced. Where was Ryan? As company commander, he was on duty and responsible for the town's safety. She pictured him in their cramped kitchen, his broad shoulders hunched over a pot of herbal medicine, his attention fixed on Lily Zhang, his cousin who always seemed to need him more than Susan ever could. With her delicate features and sly smile, Lily lounged on their couch as if she owned it. Susan's jaw tightened. Ryan should be here, leading his men, stopping this, but he wasn't. And now Ethan's life depended on her. The van's dim interior smelled of rust and sweat. Susan's gaze flicked to the men in the front seats, their voices low and urgent. She caught fragments of their conversation, something about a buyer, a price, a deadline. Her blood ran cold. Human traffickers. She'd heard whispers of such crimes in the region, but never imagined facing them herself. Ethan's soft sobs pulled her focus back. "It's okay," she whispered, inching closer despite the pain in her shoulder. "I'm here, Ethan." But a strange sensation washed over her as she spoke, a metallic taste in her mouth, a dizzying rush of déjà vu. Her vision blurred, and for a fleeting moment, she saw herself in the same van, 3 years ago, her screams for Ryan echoing unanswered. The memory was vivid, suffocating. The rescue, the betrayal, the blood. Susan blinked, her breath hitching. She'd lived this day before. She'd died on this day. And now, somehow, she was here again, her heart pounding with a second chance she didn't yet understand. The van hit a bump, jolting her back to the present. Ethan's tear-streaked face grounded her, his small hand reaching for hers. Susan squeezed it, her resolve hardening. Whatever this was, rebirth, miracle, or curse, she wouldn't let history repeat itself, not for Ethan or herself. As the van careened toward an unknown destination, Susan's mind churned with fragments of her past life and the skills she'd gleaned from Ryan's military drills. She had to act, and she had to act now. The van's engine roared, its vibrations rattling Susan Taylor's bones as she sat pressed against the cold metal wall, Ethan Carter's small hand trembling in hers. The dim interior swayed with every turn, shadows dancing across the faces of the traffickers in the front seats. Susan's shoulder throbbed from the struggle, her torn dress clinging to her sweat-dampened skin, but the pain was distant, overshadowed by a growing unease. Her mind flickered, a metallic taste flooding her mouth as if she'd bitten her tongue. The air grew heavy, and her vision blurred, pulling her into a memory so vivid it felt like drowning. 3 years ago, Susan had lived this day. The same van, the same suffocating fear, the same desperate cries from Ethan. In that life, she hadn't fought the traffickers alone. Her voice had cracked as she screamed for Ryan, her husband, the company commander who should have been patrolling these streets. "Ryan, please help us," she'd pleaded, her words swallowed by the chaos. Miraculously, he'd come barreling through the hideout with his soldiers, his face grim with determination. He'd wrestled Ethan from the trafficker's grip, his strong arms shielding the boy as gunfire echoed. Susan had collapsed, tears streaming down her face, believing her husband's heroism had saved them all. The aftermath had seemed like a triumph. General Carter, Ethan's grandfather and the town's highest authority, had praised Ryan's bravery, pinning a medal to his chest. The honor catapulted Ryan's career, his name whispered with respect in military circles. Susan, bruised but alive, had clung to the hope that their marriage, strained by Ryan's growing distance, would mend. She'd sat by his side at dinners, smiling through her aches, convinced their shared ordeal would bind them closer. But that hope had been a lie, as fragile as glass. That same day, Lily Jiang, Ryan's cousin, had fallen ill. Susan remembered her pale face, her delicate frame shivering under a blanket in their home. Ryan had hovered over her, brewing herbal medicine with a tenderness he rarely showed Susan. "She's burning up," he'd muttered, his brow furrowed. Susan had offered to help, but Ryan waved her off, his voice sharp. "You've done enough today." By nightfall, Lily's fever had worsened, her breaths shallow and ragged. The doctor arrived too late. Lily died before dawn, her body still in their guest room, a silent accusation. Ryan's grief had been a storm. He'd locked himself in their bedroom, refusing to speak, his eyes hollow when they met Susan's. Days later, he'd cornered her in the kitchen, his voice low and venomous. "This is your fault," he'd hissed. "If you hadn't chased those traffickers or made such a scene, I'd have been here for Lily. You staged that kidnapping out of jealousy, didn't you? You wanted her gone." Susan had recoiled, stunned, her protests drowned by his rage. Jealousy? She'd loved Lily like a sister, enduring her cousin's whims since childhood to keep peace in her uncle's home. But Ryan's words burrowed deep, planting seeds of doubt. The truth unraveled on the day Susan gave birth. 9 months after the kidnapping, she'd lain in a cramped hospital room, her body racked with labor pains. Ryan had been distant, his visits brief, but she'd clung to the joy of their child, a boy she'd dreamed, with her eyes and Ryan's stubborn chin. After the delivery, he'd sent the nurses away, locking the door. Weak and beaming, Susan reached for him, but his face twisted with a hatred she'd never seen. He snarled, "Lily's gone because of you," pulling a knife from his coat. She was pregnant, Susan. My baby died with her. You took them both. The first stab pierced her stomach, a searing agony that stole her breath. Susan screamed, but the room was soundproof, her cries unheard. Ryan struck again and again, 20 times, his hands slick with her blood. She'd collapsed, her vision dimming, watching as her newborn's tiny chest stilled on the bed beside her. Blood pooled beneath her, warm and endless, like a river carrying her away. In her final moment, Ryan leaned close, his voice a vicious whisper. You deserve this. You and that bastard child can rot in hell. Darkness swallowed her, her son's unopened eyes the last thing she saw. Susan gasped, the memory snapping shut like a book. The van's jolting motion yanked her back to the present, Ethan's whimpers grounding her. Her heart pounded, her palms clammy against the boy's trembling fingers. She'd died that day, betrayed by the man she'd loved, blamed for a tragedy she hadn't caused. Yet here she was, alive, her body bruised but unbroken, her mind sharp with the knowledge of what was to come. Rebirth, miracle, or curse, it didn't matter. The metallic taste lingered, a reminder of the blood she'd shed, the life she'd lost. Ethan's small voice broke through her thoughts. Miss Taylor, are we gonna die? His eyes, wide and tear-filled, searched hers for hope. Susan swallowed, her throat tight. In her past life, she'd relied on Ryan, trusting him to save them. That trust had led to her ruin. This time, she'd fight for Ethan, no matter the cost. Her gaze hardened, scanning the van's interior for anything, a loose bolt, a forgotten tool, that could aid their escape. Ryan wasn't coming. He was likely still at home, fussing over Lily, oblivious to the crisis unfolding beyond his walls. Susan squeezed Ethan's hand, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. We're going to be okay, she whispered, the lie tasting bitter. She didn't know how they'd escape, but she knew one thing. She'd lived this day before and died for it. This time she'd rewrite her fate. For Ethan, for her unborn child, for the woman she'd been too weak to save. As the van sped toward its destination, Susan's mind churned, piecing together fragments of her past life. Ryan's drills, Lily's sly smiles, the truth she'd been too blind to see. The fight was beginning. The van screeched to a halt, its tires grinding against gravel. Susan Taylor's heart pounded as the rear doors swung open, spilling harsh daylight into the dim interior. Ethan Carter, her young student, clung to her side, his small body trembling, his tear-streaked face buried against her torn dress. The traffickers, 2 men with cold eyes and rough hands, yanked them out, shoving them toward a dilapidated building at the edge of town. Its cracked walls and boarded windows loomed like a prison, the air thick with the stench of mildew and decay. Susan stumbled, her bruised shoulder screaming, but she steadied herself, keeping Ethan close. The wiry man, Lee Chang, led the way, his scarred cheek twitching as he barked orders. "Move it!" he snapped, gripping a knife that glinted with menace. His broad accomplice, silent but imposing, pushed Susan forward, his fingers bruising her arm. Inside, the hideout was a mess of clutter, rotting crates, scattered papers, and a flickering bulb casting jagged shadows. Lee Chang shoved Susan to the floor, her knees scraping against the rough concrete. He bound her neck with coarse rope, the fibers biting into her skin as he tightened the knot. Ethan whimpered beside her, his wrists already tied, his school uniform smudged with dirt. Susan's breath hitched, her body weak from the earlier struggle, but her mind raced, sharpened by the echoes of her past life. She'd been here before, 3 years ago, helpless and screaming for Ryan. That reliance had cost her everything, her child, her life, her trust. This time, she'd fight alone. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, a weapon, anything. The ropes burned, but she forced herself to focus, recalling the late nights when Ryan, preparing for military drills, had taught her to untie knots. It's about patience, he'd said, guiding her fingers through the loops. She'd practiced to please him, never imagining she'd need the skill to survive. Lee Chang crouched before her, his breath sour as he sneered. "You should have stayed out of this, teacher. Now you're just extra baggage." Susan met his gaze, her fear masked by defiance. She said, "Let the boy go," her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Lee Chang laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. "You're in no position to bargain." He stood, turning to his accomplice, who was rifling through a bag, muttering about a buyer. Susan's stomach churned. Human traffickers, profiting off children like Ethan. She had to act fast. The door creaked open, and a third man entered. Joe Carter, Lee Chang's cousin, his greasy hair slicked back, his grin twisted with malice. His eyes locked onto Susan, roaming over her with a hunger that made her skin crawl. "Well," he drawled, rubbing his hands, "a commander's wife. Never had one of those before." Susan's pulse spiked, but she forced her face to remain calm, her mind scrambling for a plan. Joe stepped closer, his stench, a mix of sweat and cheap liquor, overwhelming. "She's gonna die anyway," he said to Lee Chang. "Might as well let me have some fun first." Lee Chang frowned, his knife tapping against his thigh. "You idiot, we've got a schedule." But Joe persisted, his voice whining. "Come on, just a few minutes, I'll be quick." Susan's heart thundered, her bound hands clenching. She couldn't fight them all, not like this, but she could outsmart them. Swallowing her revulsion, she forced a shaky smile, her voice soft but deliberate. "Can we not do this in front of the child?" she said, nodding toward Ethan, whose wide eyes flickered with fear. "Take me somewhere else, please." Joe's grin widened, mistaking her plea for submission. "See? She's cooperative." Lee Chang rolled his eyes but waved a hand. "Fine, but hurry up and keep watch after." Joe grabbed Susan's arm, hauling her to her feet. The rope around her neck tugged painfully, but she bit her lip, focusing on the knots. As Joe dragged her toward a dark room across the hall, Susan's fingers worked subtly, tracing the loops she'd practiced years ago. Ryan's lessons, once a way to earn his fleeting approval, now felt like a lifeline. The side room was pitch black, its air stale and heavy. Joe shoved her inside, the door creaking shut behind them. Susan's heart raced, but she kept her movements slow, her fingers deftly loosening the rope. "Wait," she murmured, stalling as she sensed Joe's impatience. I don't want to fight." Her voice trembled, feigning surrender, but her mind was sharp, calculating. The rope slackened just enough. Distracted by his eagerness, Joe turned to fumble with his belt, his back to her for a fleeting moment. Susan seized the chance. Her hands slipped free, the rope falling silently to the floor. She scanned the room, her eyes adjusting to the dark, and spotted a wooden plank leaning against the wall. Her pulse roared in her ears as she grabbed it, the rough wood splintering against her palms. Joe turned, sensing her movement, but it was too late. Susan swung the plank with all her strength, the crack echoing as it struck his head. He cursed, staggering, then collapsed, his body slumping to the ground. Susan stood frozen, her breath ragged, the plank trembling in her hands. Her body ached, her shoulder pulsing with pain, but adrenaline surged through her. She'd done it, outwitted one of them, but Lee Chang and his accomplice were still out there, and Ethan was still in danger. She dropped the plank, her mind racing. In her past life, she'd run at this moment, desperate to find Ryan, only to set off a chain of events that led to her betrayal. This time, she'd stay, protect Ethan, and face whatever came next. She crept to the door, her bare feet silent against the cold floor. Ethan's safety was all that mattered now. The weight of her past life, Ryan's knife, Lily's death, her child's still chest, pressed against her, but it also fueled her. She wasn't the woman who died begging for mercy. She was reborn, and she'd fight with every ounce of cunning. As she peered into the hall, Lee Chang's voice drifted through, sharp and impatient. Susan tightened her grip on her resolve, ready to face the next test. Susan Taylor crouched by the door of the dark room, her breath shallow, the wooden plank discarded beside Joe Carter's unconscious form. The hideout's stale air pressed against her, thick with the scent of rust and fear. Her shoulder throbbed, her torn dress clinging to her sweat-soaked skin, but her focus was razor-sharp. Ethan Carter, her student and the old commander's grandson, was still out there, bound and terrified in the main room with Lee Chang and his accomplice. Susan's fingers trembled, not from pain but from the weight of her past life's failures. She'd died for trusting Ryan to save her. This time, she'd save Ethan herself. She eased the door open, the creak of its hinges slicing through the silence. Peering into the hall, she saw a flickering light from the main room, where Lee Chang's voice growled impatiently. "Hurry up, Joe! We're behind schedule." Susan's heart raced. Joe's collapse had bought her moments, but discovery was imminent. She crept forward, her bare feet silent on the cold concrete, her body low to avoid detection. Ethan's small frame came into view, huddled against a crate, his wrists bound tightly, his face pale but defiant. Susan's chest tightened. He was so young, so vulnerable, yet his eyes held a flicker of hope when they met hers. She mouthed, "I'm here," and Ethan nodded, his lips quivering. Susan scanned the room. Li Chang paced near a table littered with papers, his knife tucked into his belt. The broad accomplice stood by the door, his back to her, muttering into a phone. A wooden stick, part of a broken chair, lay near a pile of debris. It wasn't much, but it was something. Susan edged toward it, her movements deliberate, her mind replaying Ryan's military drills. Stay calm, assess, act. She'd once thought those lessons were to impress him. Now they were her lifeline. Her fingers closed around the stick, its rough surface grounding her. She inched closer to Ethan, her plan forming: free him, run, find help. But as she reached the crate, Li Chang's head snapped up, his scarred cheek twitching. "Joe, what's taking so long?" he barked, striding toward the hall. Susan froze, her pulse roaring. She had seconds. Dropping to her knees beside Ethan, she whispered, "Stay quiet." Her fingers worked at his ropes, the knots familiar from Ryan's training, but her hands shook, slick with sweat. Li Chang's footsteps grew louder. Susan freed Ethan's wrist just as the trafficker rounded the corner. His eyes widened, locking onto her. "You!" he roared, lunging forward. Susan shoved Ethan behind the crate and swung the stick, aiming for his head. The blow grazed his shoulder, and Li Chang snarled, grabbing her wrist and twisting hard. Pain shot through her arm, the stick clattering to the floor. She kicked at his shin, but he was stronger, his fist slamming into her jaw. Stars exploded in her vision as she stumbled, blood trickling from her lip. "Run, Ethan!" Susan gasped, shoving the boy toward the door. Ethan hesitated, his eyes wide with fear, but darted past the crate, his small frame weaving through the clutter. The broad accomplice turned, dropping his phone with a shout. Susan lunged at Li Chang again, her nails raking his arm, buying Ethan seconds. Li Chang's fury erupted. He drew his knife, the blade flashing as it slashed across her forearm. Warm blood seeped through her sleeve, but Susan didn't flinch. She threw herself at him, clinging to his wrist, her voice hoarse. "Ethan's here! He's here!" The accomplice grabbed Ethan's collar, hauling him back, but Susan's cry echoed, a desperate beacon. She wrestled with Li Chang, her strength fading, her body screaming in protest. The knife grazed her side, a sharp sting that blurred her vision, but she held on, her hands locked around his arm. Ethan kicked wildly, his small foot connecting with the accomplice's knee. The man cursed, loosening his grip, and Ethan broke free, scrambling toward the door. Shouts erupted outside. Soldiers, their voices sharp and commanding. "This is the military! Drop your weapons!" Relief flooded Susan, but Li Chang's rage surged. He shoved her to the ground, his knife raised, his eyes blazing. "You've ruined everything," he snarled. Susan rolled, dodging the blade, and grabbed the fallen stick, swinging it with her last ounce of strength. It struck his temple and he staggered, his knife clattering away. She crawled to Ethan, shielding him as soldiers burst in, their rifles trained on the traffickers. Li Chang lunged for his knife, but a soldier tackled him, pinning him to the floor. The accomplice raised his hands, his face pale, as another soldier secured Ethan, wrapping him in a blanket. Susan collapsed, her breath ragged, blood pooling beneath her arm. Her vision swam, the room spinning, but she clung to Ethan's hand, whispering, "You're safe." His small fingers squeezed hers, his sobs softening. The soldiers' voices faded, replaced by a ringing in her ears. She'd done it, saved Ethan, defied her past life's script. But as darkness crept into her vision, a memory flickered. Ryan's face, cold and accusing, blaming her for Lily's death. Susan's heart ached, not for him, but for the woman she'd been, trusting, naive, broken. This time she'd fought for herself, Ethan, and a future she could shape. The pain in her arm, the blood on her skin, was proof of her strength. As her consciousness slipped, she felt a strange peace. Whatever came next, Ryan's betrayal, Lily's schemes, she'd face it unbowed. The world went black, but her resolve burned bright. Susan Taylor stirred, her body heavy, as if anchored to the bed by invisible weights. The sharp scent of antiseptic filled her nose, and a dull ache pulsed in her forearm where the trafficker's knife had slashed her. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing a sterile hospital room bathed in pale light. White bandages wrapped her arm, stained faintly with crimson, and an IV drip hung beside her, its steady beep grounding her in the present. She blinked, disoriented, the events of the hideout flooding back, Ethan's terrified eyes, Li Cheng's blade, the soldier's shouts. She'd saved him, but at what cost? A soft sob broke her thoughts. Ethan Carter, her 7-year-old student, sat at her bedside, his small hands clutching the edge of her blanket. His school uniform was wrinkled, his face streaked with tears and smudges of dirt. "Miss Taylor, you're awake!" he cried, lunging forward to hug her, his thin arms wrapped around her, trembling with relief. Susan winced, her injuries protesting, but she returned the embrace, her heart swelling. "I'm okay, Ethan," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, his eyes bright with gratitude. The door creaked open, and a tall figure entered, his presence commanding the room. General Carter, Ethan's grandfather and the town's highest military authority, stood ramrod straight, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His narrow eyes, sharp as a hawk's, studied Susan with gratitude and suspicion. His uniform, immaculate despite the late hour, bore the weight of his rank. "Miss Taylor," he said, his voice low and measured, "thank you for saving my grandson." The words were sincere, but his tone carried an edge, as if weighing her motives. Susan's chest tightened. She knew how this looked. A schoolteacher, conveniently caught in a trafficking scheme, risking her life for the commander's grandson. In her past life, her actions had been scrutinized, and Ryan's heroics overshadowed her sacrifice. She'd been a footnote, her injuries dismissed, while Ryan reaped the rewards. Now, reborn, she saw the general's gaze for what it was, a test. "I'm Ethan's teacher," she said, meeting his eyes. "Protecting him was my duty." Her voice was firm, but inside she trembled, haunted by the memory of Ryan's betrayal. General Carter's expression softened, though his suspicion lingered. "You took a significant risk," he said, stepping closer. "Few would have done what you did." He paused, glancing at Ethan, who clung to Susan's hand. "Your husband, Ryan, was on duty when this happened. He left his post." The words hung heavy, laced with disapproval. Susan's jaw tightened. After brewing medicine for Lily, Ryan abandoned his men, town, and wife. In her past life, she'd begged the general to spare him, fearing for his career. That loyalty had cost her everything. The general continued, his tone softening. "I can ensure Ryan faces no consequences. His absence was an oversight, given your bravery. It was an offer, a chance to protect her husband, to maintain the fragile facade of their marriage." Susan's mind flashed to her past life, Ryan's cold accusations, his knife piercing her flesh, his voice snarling. "You killed Lily." She'd died for him, for a man who'd never loved her. The memory burned, fueling a resolve she hadn't known she possessed. "No," Susan said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "Ethan is my student. I did what was right. Ryan's actions are his own." The words felt like a blade, severing the last threads of her old self, the woman who'd apologized, sacrificed, and loved a man unworthy of her. General Carter's eyebrows lifted, a flicker of respect crossing his stern face. "Very well," he said, nodding. "If you need anything, Miss Taylor, my family owes you a debt." Ethan squeezed her hand, his small voice breaking the tension. "You were so brave, Miss Taylor. I was so scared, but you didn't give up." His words pierced her, a reminder of why she'd fought. In her past life, she'd been too weak, too trusting, letting Ryan's shadow eclipse her. Now she'd saved a child, defied her fate, and faced a general without flinching. But the weight of her rebirth lingered. What did it mean to be given this chance? Could she truly escape the pain of her past? A knock interrupted her thoughts. A soldier entered, saluting briskly, and handed General Carter a file. "The report, sir," he said, his voice low. The general skimmed the pages, his expression unreadable, then glanced at Susan. "Your background checks out," he said, his tone less guarded. "But this incident was no accident. We're investigating the trafficking ring. You may be called to testify." Susan nodded, her mind racing. The traffickers were in custody, but Lily's sly smile flashed in her memory. Could her cousin, always draped in inexplicably lavish clothes, be tied to this darkness? General Carter turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Rest, Miss Taylor. You've earned it." Ethan lingered, his hand still in hers, until a nurse gently ushered him out. Alone, Susan stared at the ceiling, her body aching but her mind alive with purpose. She'd survived the hideout, but the real battle lay ahead, facing Ryan, unraveling Lily's schemes, and forging a life free of her past's chains. Her wounds were a testament to her strength, her survival a promise to herself. Whatever came next, she'd meet it head on, no longer the woman who'd died in silence. Susan Taylor lay in the hospital bed, the sterile white walls closing in as the IV drip beeped rhythmically beside her. Her bandaged arm ached, the knife wound from the traffickers a constant reminder of her fight to save Ethan. The general's visit had left her mind churning, his offer to shield Ryan echoing like a temptation she'd rejected. She'd saved Ethan, defied her past life's script, but the weight of her rebirth pressed harder now. What did it mean to be free of the woman who died for Ryan's lies? Her thoughts were interrupted by the door bursting open, a familiar voice shattering the quiet. "Susan, oh my God, are you okay?" Lily Jiang rushed in, her delicate features twisted in feigned concern. Her cousin's silk blouse and gold bracelet gleamed under the fluorescent lights, too lavish for her supposed jobless state. Behind her, Ryan, Susan's husband, stood in his rumpled uniform, his broad shoulders slumped, his eyes darting nervously. Lily flung herself at Susan's bedside, her hands brushing the bandages on Susan's arm, pressing just hard enough to send a jolt of pain through her. Susan winced, pulling back, but Lily's eyes flickered with a sly glint, her lips curving into a barely concealed smirk. "Cousin, I'm so sorry," Lily cooed, her voice syrupy. "Ryan would have been there to save you if I hadn't caught a cold." She dabbed at her dry eyes, the gesture theatrical. Susan's stomach churned. She'd heard this script before in her past life. Lily's illnesses, always time to steal Ryan's attention, always leaving Susan to pick up the pieces. Her gaze fell on Lily's bracelet, its intricate design jarring against her cousin's claims of poverty. Where did she get the money for that, Susan wondered, a seed of suspicion taking root. Ryan stepped forward, his face a mask of irritation. "Susan, what the hell were you thinking?" he snapped, his voice low but sharp. "Chasing after traffickers? You've made a mess of everything. I've got to write 1,000-word self-criticism, and my job's on the line." He ran a hand through his hair, oblivious to the blood draining from Susan's face. Her heart ached, not for his anger, but for the years she'd spent swallowing it, believing she owed him her loyalty. In her past life, she'd apologized, begged for his forgiveness. Now she saw him clearly, a man who'd chosen Lily over duty, over her. Susan's voice was cold, steady. "I protected my student, Ryan. You're the one who left your post." The words cut through the room, and Ryan's eyes widened, as if struck. Lily gasped, clutching her chest, but Susan caught the flicker of annoyance in her cousin's expression. "Sis, don't be so harsh," Lily said, her tone softening, but her fingers grazed Susan's bandages again, pressing harder. Susan gritted her teeth, pain flaring, and shoved Lily's hand away. "Stop it," she said, her voice low, dangerous. Lily recoiled, her mask slipping, revealing a flash of malice. Ryan frowned, stepping between them. "Susan, Lily was sick. She could have passed out if I hadn't stayed with her. You weren't there. You don't know how bad it was." His words echoed her past life, every excuse a dagger. Susan's mind flashed to their marriage. The countless times Lily's emergencies had pulled Ryan away, fevers, fainting spells, and tears that vanished when Susan appeared. She'd believed she was the problem, too petty, too jealous. Now, reborn, she saw the pattern. Lily's manipulations, Ryan's complicity, her erasure. Her gaze hardened, meeting Ryan's. "I was fighting for a child's life, Ryan. Where were you?" The question hung, unanswered, as Ryan's jaw tightened, his guilt flickering before he buried it. Lily seized the moment, her voice saccharine. "Sis, why don't you go home? Your injuries aren't that bad, and it's hard for Ryan to keep running back and forth." She reached for Susan's chart, as if to pack her things, but Susan grabbed her wrist, her grip firm. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice icy, "and don't touch my things." Lily's eyes narrowed, but she pulled back, her smile returning like a mask. "I'm just trying to help," she murmured, glancing at Ryan, who looked away, uncomfortable. Susan's heart pounded, a mix of anger and clarity. She'd grown up in her uncle's home after her parents' death, learning to survive by keeping Lily happy. She'd surrendered every toy and opportunity to avoid her cousin's tantrums and her uncle's scorn. Even her marriage to Ryan had been Lily's cast-off. She'd deemed him beneath her, tossing him to Susan like a discarded toy. But now, with Ryan's career rising, Lily's interest had rekindled, her presence a constant wedge. Susan's wounds throbbed, but her resolve burned brighter. In her past life, she'd died for this man, for this family, believing she owed them her existence. Now she owed them nothing. Ryan, she said, her voice calm but unyielding, you need to leave, both of you. Ryan blinked, stunned, as if she'd slapped him. Lily's lips parted, her facade cracking. Sis, she said, you don't mean that, but Susan cut her off. I do. Get out. The words were a liberation, a step toward the woman she was becoming, someone who'd fought, bled, and survived. Ryan hesitated, his mouth opening to argue, but the nurse entered, her presence halting him. Visiting hours are over, she said firmly, eyeing the tension. Lily huffed, grabbing her purse, her bracelet glinting as she stormed out. Ryan lingered, his eyes searching Susan's, but she turned away, staring at the wall until he left. Alone, Susan exhaled, her body trembling. She'd faced traffickers, a general, and now her betrayers. The road ahead, Ryan's excuses, Lily's schemes, would test her further, but she was ready. Her past life's shadows lingered, but her rebirth was a fire, and she'd let it burn. Susan Taylor limped through the front door of her home, the hospital's sterile scent still clinging to her. Her leg, encased in a heavy cast, throbbed with each step, and the bandages on her arm itched beneath her torn dress. The familiar living room felt foreign now, Ryan's boots by the door, Lily's scarf draped over the couch, a silent invasion of her space. The hospital confrontation had left her raw, her defiance against Ryan and Lily a spark that now burned fiercely. She'd saved Ethan, faced a general, and rejected Ryan's excuses. But returning home, she felt the weight of her past life's chains, threatening to pull her back. Lily Jiang lounged on the couch, her silk blouse shimmering, a glossy magazine in her hands. Her gold bracelet caught the light, starkly contrasting with the modest room. She glanced up, her delicate features twisting into a mocking smile. Well, look who's finally back, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. You're such a burden, Susan, dragging yourself around like that. Ryan emerged from the kitchen with a glass of water, his face mixed with guilt and irritation. He didn't meet Susan's eyes, his attention drifting to Lily, who sighed dramatically and fanned herself. I'm feeling dizzy, Ryan, she murmured, leaning back. Susan's stomach churned. She'd seen this act before, in her past life, Lily's sudden ailments, always timed to monopolize Ryan's care. She limped to the armchair, easing herself down, her cast heavy against the floor. Ryan moved to Lily's side, his hand brushing her shoulder. You need to rest, he said softly, then glanced at Susan, his tone hardening. You shouldn't be out of the hospital so soon. You're making things more complicated for everyone. Susan's jaw tightened. She'd have apologized in her past life and smoothed over his anger. Now she saw his neglect for what it was, betrayal. Ignoring them, Susan's gaze fell on the nightstand by the couch, where a small black box sat, her mother's jade pendant, the last relic of her parents' love. Her heart skipped. She'd kept it hidden, a quiet anchor through years of loss. Limping to the nightstand, she opened the box, her fingers trembling. It was empty. The air left her lungs, a wave of grief crashing over her. Where is it? She demanded, her voice low, turning to Lily. Her cousin's eyes gleamed, a smirk playing on her lips. Oh, that old thing? Lily said, feigning innocence. I tossed it in the river. You don't need it, clinging to the past like a child. Susan's vision blurred, hot tears stinging her eyes. The pendant wasn't just jewelry. It was her mother's laughter, her father's bedtime stories, the family she'd lost to a mining accident. She'd worn it through her uncle's cold home, Lily's taunts, and her marriage's slow decay. Its loss felt like losing them all over again. You had no right, Susan whispered, her voice breaking. She stepped toward Lily, her cast dragging, her hands clenched. Lily stood, her smirk widening. What are you going to do about it? She taunted, then slapped Susan hard across the face. The sting radiated through Susan's cheek, but she didn't flinch. Rage and grief surged, drowning her pain. She shoved Lily back, her strength surprising them both. Lily stumbled, her bracelet clinking against the couch. How dare you! She shrieked, lunging forward, her nails raking Susan's arm, tearing at her bandages. Blood seeped through, but Susan held her ground, her eyes blazing. Ryan stormed between them, his face twisted with anger. Enough, Susan, he roared, grabbing her shoulders and shoving her against the wall. The impact jarred her cast, pain shooting through her leg, her wounds burning. Susan gasped, her vision swimming, but her resolve hardened. She'd died for this man, bled for his lies, lost her child to his hatred. No more. Ryan, she said, her voice steady despite the pain, we're done. Let's get a divorce. The words hung in the air, a thunderclap. Ryan froze, his hands dropping, his eyes wide with shock. Lily laughed, a cold, mocking sound. A divorce? Good luck. You'll leave with nothing, not a cent, not this house. Everything's Ryan's. She stepped closer, her heel grinding into Susan's foot, the pain sharp but fleeting against Susan's fury. Susan met Lily's gaze, unyielding. She said, I don't want anything from him, her voice clear, just my freedom. Ryan's face crumpled, a mix of guilt and disbelief. Susan, you don't mean that, he stammered, reaching for her. She stepped back, her cast scraping the floor, her heart pounding with a clarity she'd never known. She'd clung to this marriage in her past life, believing love could fix it. Now she saw the truth. Ryan's devotion to Lily, Lily's relentless cruelty, her years of sacrifice for nothing. The pendant's loss was a wound, but it also freed her. It was time to let go of the past. Lily scoffed, flipping her hair. You're pathetic, she said, but her eyes flickered with unease, as if sensing Susan's shift. Ryan opened his mouth, but no words came. Susan turned away, limping to the window, her reflection faint in the glass, a woman battered but unbroken. The memory of her mother's pendant stung, but it also reminded her who she was, a survivor, a fighter, a woman reborn. Outside, the town hummed with life, oblivious to her battle. She'd face Ryan's pleas, Lily's schemes, and the Traffickers' trial, but she'd do it on her terms. The chains of her past life were breaking, and she'd never wear them again. Susan Taylor slumped against the wall, her breath ragged, pain radiating from her reopened wounds. The living room, once a haven, felt like a battlefield, the air thick with the sting of Lily's slap and Ryan's shove. Her leg cast scraped the floor, her bandaged arm bleeding through, but her eyes burned with defiance. The loss of her mother's jade pendant, a wound as raw as her flesh, had snapped the last threads of her old self. She had demanded a divorce, her words a blade cutting through years of betrayal. Ryan stood frozen, his face pale, while Lily's mocking laugh echoed, her silk blouse glinting like armor. You'll leave with nothing, Lily sneered, her gold bracelet clinking as she stepped closer, her heel hovering over Susan's hand. This house, Ryan's money, it's all mine. Susan's heart pounded, but she held Lily's gaze, unyielding. She said, I only want my freedom, her voice steady, a vow forged in the fires of her rebirth. Ryan's mouth opened, his guilt flickering, but before he could speak, the front door slammed open with a force that shook the walls. General Carter stormed in, his silver hair catching the light, his uniform a symbol of unyielding authority. Behind him, Ryan's commanding officer followed, his face grim. You dare lay hands on her? General Carter roared, his voice a thunderclap. His sharp eyes locked onto Susan's bloodied arm, her crumpled form, and his expression darkened, fury etched into every line. He strode forward, kneeling to lift her gently from the floor, his hands steady, but trembling with restrained rage. Are you all right, Miss Taylor? He asked, his tone softer but edged with steel. Susan nodded, pain flaring, but her resolve held. I'm fine, she whispered, though her body screamed otherwise. Ryan stammered, his hands raised. Sir, it's not what it looks like. I was just... The general cut him off, his gaze icy. Silence, Lieutenant. You abandoned your post while your wife fought traffickers to save my grandson. He turned to Susan, his voice rising with conviction. This woman risked her life, took a knife to her arm, to protect Ethan, and this is how you repay her? The room fell silent, the weight of his words crushing. Ryan's face drained of color, his career's foundation crumbling under the truth. Lily scoffed, tossing her hair, oblivious to the storm she'd provoked. Some older man thinks he can boss Ryan around, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Who are you, anyway? Susan's new friend? She laughed, but the sound faltered as General Carter's eyes narrowed, his presence a gathering storm. He stepped toward her, his voice low, cutting. I am General Carter, commander of this region. And you, Miss Jung, are standing in the home of a hero. Lily's smirk vanished, her bracelet suddenly conspicuous, hinting at her ill-gotten wealth. The commanding officer cleared his throat, sweat beading on his brow. Lieutenant Ryan, your negligence during the kidnapping is unforgivable. You're stripped of your rank, effective immediately." Ryan swayed, his knees buckling, as if the ground had vanished beneath him. "No, sir, please," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "I didn't know it was your grandson. I was just—" The general raised a hand, silencing him. "You didn't know because you weren't there. Susan was." Susan's chest tightened, a mix of vindication and sorrow. She'd begged for Ryan's forgiveness in her past life, shielding him from consequences. Now she watched him fall, his pride shattered, and felt no urge to catch him. Her gaze shifted to Lily, whose eyes darted nervously, her confidence unraveling. "This is ridiculous," Lily muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. Susan's suspicion deepened. Lily's lavish clothes, her brazen attitude. Could she be tied to the traffickers? The thought lingered, a thread to unravel later. General Carter turned to Susan, his expression softening. "Miss Taylor, you owe this man nothing. If you need legal or financial support, my family is in your debt." Susan met his eyes, her voice steady despite the pain. "Thank you, sir. I want to move forward." The general nodded, respect flickering in his gaze. He gestured to the officer who escorted Ryan and Lily toward the door. Ryan's shoulders slumped, his eyes pleading, but Susan looked away, her heart a fortress he'd never breach again. Lily hissed as she passed, her voice low. "You'll regret this, Susan." But the threat was hollow, her bravado crumbling under the general's scrutiny. As the door closed, Susan exhaled, her body trembling. The room was quiet, but the echoes of her past life, Ryan's knife, Lily's lies, her child's still chest, lingered. She'd faced them, survived them, and now justice had begun to tilt in her favor. Her wounds ached, but they were proof of her strength, her rebirth a fire that no one could extinguish. She'd meet it unbroken, whatever lay ahead. Divorce, truth, or vengeance. Susan Taylor stood in the Civil Affairs office, the weight of her decision steadying her trembling hands. Her leg cast clunked against the tiled floor, her bandaged arm hidden beneath a borrowed sweater, but her eyes were clear, resolute. The confrontation with Ryan and Lily, General Carter's intervention, and losing her mother's pendant forged her anew. She'd demanded a divorce, severing the chains of a marriage built on betrayal. Today, she'd make it final, her rebirth a fire that no one could extinguish. The clerk's desk loomed ahead, a gateway to freedom. Ryan stood beside her, his once proud posture slumped, his demoted status evident in his civilian clothes. His eyes, red-rimmed and desperate, darted to Susan, searching for a crack in her resolve. "Susan, please," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "We can fix this. I messed up, but I love you." The words, once her lifeline, now rang hollow. In her past life, she'd clung to them, believing his lies until his knife stole her breath. Now, she saw him for what he was, a man who'd chosen Lily over her and blamed her for his failures. Susan's voice was cold, unyielding. "There's nothing to fix, Ryan. Sign the papers." The clerk, a stern woman with glasses, slid the divorce documents across the desk, her pen tapping impatiently. Ryan hesitated, his hand hovering, but Susan's gaze didn't waver. She'd fought traffickers, faced a general, and survived his violence. This was her victory, and she wouldn't yield. With a shaky breath, Ryan signed, his signature a jagged scrawl. The clerk stamped the papers, her voice flat. "Divorce finalized. You're free, Miss Taylor." Before Susan could exhale, the door swung open, and Lily Jung strode in, her silk skirt swishing, her gold bracelet glinting. Her aunt trailed behind, her face twisted with disdain. Lily's eyes locked onto Ryan, her smile saccharine. "Ryan, you're going to be a dad," she announced, her hand resting on her stomach. "It's our baby." The words hit like a slap, confirming the affair Susan had long suspected. Ryan's face paled, his mouth opening wordlessly. Susan's heart stung, not for love lost, but for the years she'd wasted on a lie. The clerk's voice cut through, loud and incredulous. "You're getting married now?" Her question echoed, drawing gasps from the small crowd of onlookers. Whispers erupted. Divorced one second, marrying the next? What kind of woman does that? Lily's head sank, her cheeks flushing, the public shame stripping her bravado. Her aunt pulled her close, glaring at the crowd. "Mind your business," she snapped, but the murmurs grew, a chorus of judgment. Susan stood silent, her expression stone, letting Lily's humiliation unfold. Lily's eyes flashed with desperation, turning to Susan. "This is your fault," she hissed, her voice low. You pushed him away. Susan met her gaze, unflinching. You made your choices, Lily. Live with them. The truth of Ryan's infidelity, now laid bare, was a weight lifted. In her past life, she'd doubted herself, believing Lily's lies about her pettiness. Now, reborn, she saw their affair for what it was, a betrayal that had started long before her death. The office doors opened again, and 3 soldiers entered, their uniforms crisp, their expressions grim. The lead officer stepped forward, his voice firm. Lily Jiang, you're under arrest for involvement in multiple kidnapping cases. The room froze, the crowd's whispers silenced. Lily's bracelet and silk clothes suddenly made sense, funded by the trafficking ring Susan had thwarted. Lily's face crumpled, her hands clutching her skirt. No, I didn't do anything, she cried, her voice breaking. Ryan, please help me! Ryan stood rooted, his eyes wide with shock. Lily, what's this about? He stammered, but the soldiers ignored him, cuffing Lily's wrists. She struggled, her voice rising to a scream. It's Susan! She framed me! She's jealous! The accusation was desperate, hollow. Susan's suspicion, sparked by Lily's lavish lifestyle, now crystallized. The traffickers' papers, the general's investigation, Lily had been complicit, profiting from stolen lives. Susan's heart hardened. Her cousin's cruelty ran deeper than she'd imagined. The soldiers turned to Ryan, their leader's voice cold. Lieutenant Ryan, you're implicated as an accessory for harboring Miss Jiang. Come with us. Ryan's knees buckled, his face ashen. I didn't know, he gasped, but the soldiers were unmoved, escorting him out. Lily's aunt wailed, lunging at the officers, only to be restrained for obstruction. The chaos unfolded like a storm, but Susan stood apart, her divorce papers clutched in her hand, a quiet triumph amidst the wreckage. As the soldiers led Lily and Ryan away, Susan stepped outside, the cool air a balm against her wounds. The town bustled, oblivious to her victory. In her past life, Lily's death had hidden her crimes, and Ryan's lies had buried Susan. Now, justice had cracked open the truth. Her wounds ached, her pendant's loss a lingering scar, but she was free of Ryan's betrayal, Lily's malice, the woman she'd been. The road ahead held trials, but Susan's rebirth was her shield, and she'd walk it unbroken. Susan Taylor wheeled her suitcase into her parents' old house, the creak of the door echoing through the dusty silence. The divorce papers, freshly stamped, rested in her bag, a quiet victory after the chaos of the civil office. Ryan's fall, Lily's arrest, the truth of their betrayal laid bare. Her leg cast thudded against the worn floorboards, her bandaged arm aching, but her heart felt lighter, unburdened by the chains of her past life. The house, untouched since her parents died in a mining accident, smelled of must and memories. Faded photographs lined the walls, her mother's smile a beacon in the dim light. She paused at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the wood where her father had carved her initials as a child. The loss of her mother's jade pendant still stung, a wound Lily's cruelty had deepened. But this house held other traces of love, her parents' laughter, bedtime stories, and warmth. Susan exhaled, resolve settling in her bones. She'd fought traffickers, faced Ryan's violence, and walked away from a marriage that had killed her once. This was her chance to rebuild, to reclaim the woman she'd been before betrayal dimmed her light. Dust coated every surface, a testament to years of neglect. Susan set to work, sweeping floors and wiping windows, each motion a defiance of her past life's despair. Her injuries slowed her, but the labor felt cleansing, a way to honor the home her parents had left her. Ryan had once urged her to sell it, dismissing its sentimental value, but she'd refused, a decision that now felt like fate. As sunlight streamed through the cleaned windows, the house began to glow, its warmth stirring memories of safety, of belonging. A knock at the door startled her, her grip tightening on the broom, her pulse quickened. Ryan? Lily's aunt? She limped to the entrance, peering through the peephole, and relaxed. Ben Carter, Ethan's father, stood outside, his tall frame slightly hunched, a box of mung bean pastries in his hands. His dark eyes, steady and kind, met hers as she opened the door. I thought you might need some company, he said, his voice low, a faint smile softening his serious face. Moving back in can't be easy. Susan stepped aside, gesturing him in. Thank you, Ben. It's a lot, but I'm managing. She'd met Ben briefly in the hospital, his quiet gratitude for saving Ethan starkly contrasting with Ryan's bluster. Now his presence felt grounding, his calm strength mirroring resilience. He set the pastries on the table, his movements careful, as if aware of the fragility of the moment. "This place has good bones," he said, glancing around. "My wife and I fixed up an old house like this once. Takes time, but it's worth it." His mention of his late wife caught Susan's attention. "You lost her young, didn't you?" she asked softly, remembering Ethan's caretaker's words about the boy's quiet nature. Ben nodded, his gaze distant. 5 years ago, cancer. Ethan was barely 2. It's been just us since, learning to keep going. His honesty, raw but unforced, stirred something in Susan. She'd lost so much, her parents, her child, her trust, but like Ben, she'd kept moving, fighting for a future. They sat at the table, sharing the pastries, their conversation easing into stories of Ethan's antics and Susan's teaching days. Ben's laugh, warm and rare, filled the room, and Susan found herself smiling, the weight of her wounds lifting. As dusk fell, the door burst open, and Ethan bounded in, his school bag swinging. "Miss Taylor!" he cried, hugging her tightly, mindful of her cast. "Dad said we could visit. Can I help clean?" His energy was infectious, his trust a balm to her scars. Susan ruffled his hair, her heart swelling. "You can dust the shelves, but no climbing." Ethan grinned, grabbing a cloth, while Ben watched, his eyes soft. Over dinner, simple noodles Susan had prepared, Ben shared more of his life, his work as a mechanic, his struggles raising Ethan alone, his quiet pride in his son's resilience. Susan saw herself in him, a survivor piecing together a life after loss. The house, once a tomb of memories, felt alive with their laughter, a new family forming in the spaces her parents had left. As Ben and Ethan prepared to leave, Susan handed Ethan a small book, a gift for his reading, from her shelf. "You're always welcome here," she said, her voice steady. Ben paused at the door, his gaze meeting hers. "You're stronger than you know, Susan," he said, his words simple but profound. She smiled, warmth spreading through her. The night air was calm as she watched them go, the stars above a promise of tomorrow. Her past life's pain, Ryan's knife, Lily's lies, faded against this new beginning. She was home, and she was healing. Susan Taylor woke to the soft glow of morning light filtering through her parents' old house, now her sanctuary. The dust was gone, the floors polished, the air carrying the faint scent of lavender from a candle she'd lit. Though still cumbersome, her leg cast felt lighter, her bandaged arm healing beneath fresh dressings. The divorce, the arrests, the weight of her past life's betrayals, Ryan's knife, Lily's malice, had begun to fade, replaced by a quiet hope. This house, once a tomb of loss, was alive again, promising a new beginning. Days had settled into a gentle rhythm. Each evening, Ethan Carter bounded through her door after school, his laughter a melody chasing shadows away. Ben Carter, his father, followed, his steady presence a comfort Susan hadn't known she needed. They'd brought warmth to her home, Ethan with his handmade toys, Ben with his quiet acts of care, fixing a creaky shelf or cooking a simple meal. Today, as Susan sat at the kitchen table grading papers, Ethan burst in, clutching a paper dragonfly, its delicate wings painted red. "Miss Taylor, look! I made this for you," he chirped, proudly holding it out. Susan smiled, taking the dragonfly gently. "It's beautiful, Ethan," she said, her voice soft. His eyes sparkled, and he climbed onto the chair beside her, reading aloud from a storybook. His small voice filled the room, pausing to glance at her, as if checking she was listening. "Can I lean against you, Miss Taylor?" he asked, his tone shy but hopeful. Her heart melted. She'd carried a gentle and quiet son who never saw the world in her past life. Ethan's trust and warmth felt like a gift, a chance to nurture again. She opened her arms, and he nestled close, reading on. Ben stood by the stove, stirring a pot of soup, his dark eyes catching hers with a warmth that made her cheeks flush. He'd shared more of himself over these visits, his life as a widower, his love for Ethan, his quiet resilience after loss. Susan saw her strength in him, a mirror of survival through pain. Susan's gaze drifted to an old drawer by the couch as Ethan read. On impulse, she limped over, her cast thudding softly, and opened it, her breath caught. In a forgotten velvet pouch, there was her mother's jade pendant, its green stone gleaming, untouched by Lily's lie about tossing it into the river. Tears pricked her eyes, relief washing over her. She'd mourned the pendant as a piece of her parents, a symbol of love lost to Lily's cruelty. Finding it now felt like a reclamation, a sign she was healing. She clutched it, her fingers tracing its smooth edges, memories of her mother's laughter flooding back. Ben noticed, setting the ladle down. "Is that important to you?" he asked, his voice gentle. Susan nodded, her throat tight. "It's my mother's. I thought it was gone forever." She slipped it around her neck, its weight a quiet anchor. Ethan paused his reading, his eyes wide. "It's pretty, Miss Taylor," he said, then tripped as he reached to touch it, the paper dragonfly falling to the floor. Its wings snapped and his face fell, disappointment clouding his joy. "I didn't mean to," he mumbled, his voice small. Susan crouched, wincing at her cast, and gathered the pieces. Before she could speak, Ben knelt beside her, his deft fingers piecing the dragonfly together. "There," he said, handing it to her with a soft smile. Ethan's awe lit up the room, and he blurted, "Miss Taylor, why's your face so red?" Susan laughed, her ears burning, and swatted Ethan playfully. "Finish your homework before you tease me," she said, deflecting. Ben chuckled, scooping Ethan into his arms and kissing his cheek. The room filled with their laughter, a warmth Susan hadn't felt since her parents' days. As they ate dinner, the soup's aroma mingling with their stories, Susan's heart swelled. She'd lost this in her past life, a family, a home, a love untainted by betrayal. Later, as Ethan napped on the couch, Ben sat across from Susan, his hands fidgeting. "Susan," he said, his voice low, nervous, "I've seen your strength, your heart. These past days, I've fallen for you." His eyes met hers, earnest, a flush creeping up his neck. "I promise I'll treat you and Ethan right if you have me." Susan's breath caught, her past life's pain, Ryan's cold blade, her child's still chest, fading against this moment. She reached for his hand, her fingers steady. "Yes, Ben," she whispered, her smile soft but certain. Ethan stirred, bounding over with a cheer, oblivious to the moment but adding to its joy. Susan clutched the pendant, her heart full. The scars of her past life, the wounds of her fight, were healing in this house, with these people. She was no longer the woman who'd died in despair. She was reborn, and love, tentative but true, was hers again. Winter's chill had settled over the town, frost kissing the windows of Susan Taylor's childhood home, now alive with warmth. The once dusty rooms glowed with soft lamplight, the scent of fresh bread wafting from the kitchen where Ben Carter stood, his sleeves rolled up, kneading dough for breakfast. Ethan Carter, his son, sat cross-legged on the floor, his school bag packed, humming as he colored a picture of a dragonfly. Susan, her leg cast finally off, moved with ease, her mother's jade pendant resting against her chest, a reclaimed treasure that anchored her heart. The scars of her past life, Ryan's betrayal, Lily's cruelty, her lost child, had faded, replaced by a quiet strength forged through pain and rebirth. Each morning unfolded like a gift, Ben's steady hands preparing meals, Ethan's laughter filling the air, Susan grading papers at the table, her smile no longer forced. Once a silent monument to her parents' loss, the house now hummed with life, a testament to the family she'd built. She'd fought traffickers, faced Ryan's violence, and walked away from a marriage that had killed her once. Her rebirth had been a fire, burning away the woman who died in despair, leaving someone new, resilient, whole, loved. Outside, the town continued, its rhythm unchanged, but Susan's world had transformed. Lily Jiang's trial had concluded weeks ago, a public spectacle that stripped her cousin bare. Evidence from the trafficking ring, documents, victim testimonies, had painted a damning picture. Draped in her ill-gotten silks, Lily had profited from stolen lives, her gold bracelet a mark of her greed. In court, she'd pleaded, blaming her upbringing, Ryan, even Susan. But the judge was unmoved, 12 years in prison, a sentence that echoed with justice. Susan hadn't attended, choosing to plant flowers in her garden, a quiet act of renewal. Ryan, too, had fallen. Investigations tied him to Lily's schemes, and his negligence in harboring her earned him 3 years probation. His once proud rank, his reputation, crumbled like ash. Letters arrived, scrawled with apologies and promises, but Susan left them unopened, tucking them into a drawer beside her divorce certificate. She'd read one, briefly, his words pleading for forgiveness, but they held no power. The man who'd stabbed her, blamed her for Lily's death, was a ghost of her past life. She'd moved beyond him, her heart no longer his to wound. One evening, as snow dusted the yard, Susan stood at the window, her breath fogging the glass. Ethan and Ben chased each other outside, their flashlights dancing in the dark, laughter ringing like bells. She clutched her pendant, its smooth jade a reminder of her mother's love and influence. The divorce certificate, now a symbol of closure, lay in its drawer, no longer a weight, but a milestone. She'd found it one afternoon, organizing her parents' old things, and held it, reflective, before tucking it away. Her pain had ended so that this brighter story could begin. Ben stepped inside, his cheeks flushed from the cold, a scarf Susan had knitted wrapped around his neck. "They're calling for more snow," he said, his smile warm. Ethan bounded in, shaking snow from his hair, and tugged Susan's hand. "Play, Miss Taylor!" She laughed, letting him pull her outside. The yard was a canvas of white, their footprints weaving patterns as they tossed snowballs, their voices echoing into the night. Ben caught her eye, his gaze steady, and took her hand, his warmth grounding her. "You've made this home, Susan," he said softly, for Ethan, for me. Her heart swelled, the memory of her past life's darkness, Ryan's knife, her child's still chest, fading against this moment. She'd been reborn to rewrite her fate, and she had. With Ben, she'd found a love built on trust, not betrayal. With Ethan, a child to nurture, not mourn. The stars above glittered, a promise of tomorrows she'd once thought impossible. She squeezed Ben's hand, her pendant glinting in the moonlight, and joined Ethan in the snow, her laughter mingling with theirs. Back inside, they gathered around the table, sharing hot cocoa, their stories weaving a tapestry of hope. Ethan yawned, his drawing of the dragonfly now framed on the wall, symbolizing their bond. Susan looked at Ben, Ethan, and the home they'd built, and felt peace settle within her. She thought some stories end in pain, but others begin in healing. Hers had, and it was only the start.